Hello everyone. I've decided to put this PowerPoint with voiceover on YouTube for those who have to miss a Zoom lecture. They do not replace the lecture because they're not interactive, so you don't have the discussions and exchanges with me and your colleagues, but at least it will be your plan B if you have to miss a Zoom lecture. In this first PowerPoint of the series on race and racism, I will not even talk about race. I will talk about the beginnings of the idea of evolution. I will talk about natural selection and other sources of variability in human beings. So I will start with a little bit of history. That's a very, very quick overview. We'll start with two important intellectual revolutions that really turned the religious foundations of the world upside down in the Western world. The first blow was brought in the 16th century by Copernicus. He said that the Earth was not at the center of universe. Oh my God, that was really a blow to the ego of humans. And the second one came during the 19th century with Darwin, who said that we evolved from primate ancestors and we share common ancestors with modern day animals. Oh my God, that was another blow to the ego of human beings. Until Renaissance in the Western world, it's the view of the church that has dominated, that was used to explain the creation of Earth and the universe and the skies and the animals and living beings and humans. As described in the first book of the Bible, the Genesis, man is made in the image of God. So man was created with the earth and the skies and life during 6 days by God. And this happened around 6,000 years ago. So, how do those who study the Bible come up with this number of around 6,000 years ago? It is by counting the generations from Adam and Eve to Jesus. This would have happened 6,000 years before today. This would involve the idea of creationism. Today, we use the word creationism to describe the rejection of the principle of evolution. So, if you do not believe in evolution, you follow the principle of creationism. But the reality is more complex than that. Creationism really means that someone's belief that Earth and life and the universe and man were created by a supernatural force. So, to a certain extent, you could be creationist and believe in the evolution. What really is the opposite of the idea of evolution is called fixism. So, fixism is really important here. It involves that species were created, probably by a god, under a definitive aspect. They are immutable, they do not change. So, this really is the absence of evolution. You can see in the picture here a painting by Raphael showing God creating the animals. So, this is the idea of fixism, God creating species under their definitive aspect. This idea of a divine creation of species under their definitive aspect was really well accepted until the 17th century. But during the 17th century, some people became skeptical about it. They were observing nature more than ever, and they were seeing things that made them skeptical about creationism and fixism. They were observing, above all, geological strata in mines in Europe. And they observed that those fossilized remains found in the upper layers of the earth were very often man-made. But there was no man-made objects in the lower layers. The lower strata contained remains of animals only, and also contain remains of animals that do not exist anymore, that were unknown animals. So this does not fit really well with the idea of a recent creation of Earth and of species created under their definitive aspect. No one really wanted to say it loud at first because people were afraid of being punished by the clergy. But during the 18th century, the idea of transformism started to take place around. It was an idea that was circulating among scholars. Transformism is the opposite of fixism. It's the idea that says that living organisms, plants, animals, would have evolved from previous forms, previous species of plants and animals. So this is the idea of evolution. At first, no one was mentioning a human evolution, but people kind of became curious about the evolution of animals and plants. And precisely during the 18th century came this scholar, this naturalist, Carl von Linné. That's an important one. It's in red, so you have to know his name for the test. I'm not asking you to remember any date, but the name of the guy is important here. Linné put together the binomial classification of species. This is what he developed. And this is important to understand the principle of evolution, not to understand, but to link with the principle of evolution. Linné did not mention evolution. He was probably, or he was officially a fixist, so he did not mention the evolution of animals, and especially not the evolution of humans, but he classified animals and plants into genus and species. So many different species belonged to the same genus because they were linked together. They were kind of family. And his classification, we still use it today. Some species are very similar, like, for example, Canis lupus. This is a wolf. Canis latrans is a coyote. So both are different species that belong to the same genus. So if you belong to the same group, it means you're family. And if you belong to the same family, it means that you have a common ancestor. It was probably not the goal of Linné with his classification, but voluntarily or not, he brought the idea of transformism. Because if you have the same family or the same genus, it means you have a common ancestor. If you have a common ancestor, it means that you come from something. There is some kind of idea about evolution around. So Linné opened the door to the idea of transformism, to the idea of evolution, voluntarily or not. In the 1800s, during the 19th century, the idea of evolution was not accepted by the church, but it was circulating among scholars in Europe. And scholars, even if they believed in evolution, they were not really able to tell by which mechanisms it was happening. We are in the 19th century, so there is no powerful microscope to see DNA, to see cells of living beings. So these scholars were not aware of the existence of DNA, the existence of genes or mutations or these things. They really were trying, though, to understand how does evolution work. And the first scholar who brought an explanation about evolution is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, a French scholar. He tried to explain how evolution works. He was wrong in his explanations, in many things about his explanations, but he brought the first explanation. Lamarck's theory was called inheritance of acquired characteristics. It means animals adapt to their environment during lifetime, and they modify their organs by using them a lot or not using them at all. I don't know if some of you do yoga, but this is a good example. If you do yoga, if you stretch a lot your back, you're going to be a little bit taller than you would normally be. So you grow a little bit because the discs between your vertebrae get thicker. So this is a modification of your organs by using them. Another example would be working out a lot and developing muscles. So this is a development of organs during lifetime. If you do not use an organ at all, it will, according to Lamarck, atrophy. It means if you do not use your muscle at all during a long time because you're in bed, you're sick, you're injured, you will lose a lot of muscle mass. And until now, everything is all right in Lamarck's theory. But he said that the modified characters acquired by living beings during lifetime would be passed on to the offspring, would be inherited by the offspring. So from generation to generation, by a kind of cumulative process, transformations would be amplified. And he gave a famous example, the example of the giraffe. So giraffes during their lifetime stretch their neck a lot because they have to eat the leaves very high in the trees. So a single individual might stretch its neck if it's necessary during lifetime, maybe 1-2 centimeters, I don't know. And this transformation acquired in life would be transmitted to the babies of the individual, and so on and so forth. So after many generations, giraffes have longer necks. So what was right in Lamarck's theory is that evolution exists and animals change their organs by using them a lot. But what was wrong, these changes acquired during life are not inherited by the offspring. For a character to be inherited by the offspring, it has to be written in the DNA of an individual. And things you acquire during lifetime do not change the nature of your DNA. So if you work out a lot, if you lift weights, you gain muscle, these changes will not be transmitted to your offspring. I'm sorry. They will have to lift weights to be muscular. Only what is in the DNA of a person is transmitted to the offspring, and what we acquire during lifetime is not in the DNA. So in this idea, Lamarck was wrong. A few decades after came Darwin. And Darwin came up with a theory about evolution that is still accepted by the scientific community. There are some glitches in it. It's not totally complete, but it's not wrong. In 1859, he published a book called The Origin of Species, in which he explains his theory of evolution called the theory of natural selection. Darwin spent a great deal of his career observing nature around South America, and he observed animals on the continent in Ecuador and around. He observed similar animals in isolated islands, and he noticed that animals in the mainland were different from animals in isolated islands. So for him, this means these animals have evolved separately. So they have evolved differently. Now I will briefly explain the theory of natural selection. There are 3 preconditions that have to be present for natural selection and for evolution to happen If one of the three conditions is not there, evolution will not happen. The first condition, condition A, says that all species produce more offspring than the natural carrying capacity of the environment. By consequence, there is a fight for survival. This is true for all living species. Frogs will lay more eggs than the natural capacity of the environment. Trees will produce too many seeds. Not all of them will be able to survive. Same thing for any species of animals. Too many offspring, not all of them can survive until adulthood and reproductive age, so there will be a fight for survival. Condition B says that there is a internal variability within species. So within the same species, all individuals, every individual is different from the other. There is a lot of visible differences. You can look at all the students in the class. We're all different, but there is a lot of invisible differences as well. Our blood composition, our resistance to disease, etc. And these variable characters we have are hereditary. This is very important. We transmit them to our offspring. Condition C, the third one, says that we need selective pressures from the environment for evolution to happen. So the environment has to change. Maybe it's becoming colder, warmer, drier. Maybe there's a new predator around. Maybe there's a new virus around. Maybe humans or animals migrate, so they go to a different environment. But there must be a change in the environment. So there is this fight for survival, and those with favorable traits will survive better in a new environment. And what is being fit? There's no definition of being fit. It depends on the environment. If you take a population of seals, if it's a very, very cold environment, well, the fittest seals are the fattest and the more hairy baby seals. So being fit or not really depends on the environment. So condition C says that there's what we call a selective pressure. The environment will impose a pressure on populations. And remember, the three conditions must be there for natural selection to operate. So as a consequence, there's too many offspring, there's variability, they're not all the same, there's a pressure of the environment. So what will happen? Some individuals will be more fit. They will have favorable characteristics that will allow them to survive, to grow until adulthood and reproductive age, and to have offspring. So those individuals with favorable characteristics will reproduce more. We call it reproductive success. And they will pass on their genes. They will contribute to the nature of the next generations. They will contribute to evolution. Individuals without the favorable characteristics will die earlier, will not survive until reproductive age, or if they do, they will have less offspring. So they will not pass on a lot of genes in the next generations. As a consequence, according to the nature of the environment, favorable traits will pass on to the next generations. They will spread more and more in the population, so the species will change according to the environment. The species will evolve, and this is Darwin's explanation of evolution. Darwin's theory of natural selection explains evolution well, is not mistaken, but it's not 100% complete or accurate. Stephen Jay Gould recently brought the theory of punctuated equilibrium to complete Darwin's theory. According to the theory of natural selection, to Darwin, species would be in constant change. So evolution is slow, it happens peacefully, gradually, constantly, never ends. So it's a constant, slow, and continuous process. According to Gould, evolution is not slow, gradual, or constant. It was made of a series of brief rushes during which evolution happens quickly, followed by long stages during which nothing really happens. So species would change not gradually, but very quickly with sudden events. And these sudden events would be rapid changes in the environment as caused by migrations on other territories, which would put some positive selective pressure on mutations. So mutations happen all the time, we'll see that later on, but migrations in different environment would select some mutations to be beneficial for the species, and those would trigger rapid evolution. So according to Gould, evolution is not constant. It is very quick sometimes and not happening maybe during a long period of time after that. So natural selection is one of the sources of variation in living species. That we're going to focus more on humans. But mutations also work hand in hand with natural selection to bring variation between human beings and between individuals of the same species. So mutations are a source of variability. Darwin didn't know that. He did not have access during the 19th century to a powerful microscope, a microscope powerful enough to see DNA and chromosomes, and this is where mutations happen. Mutations, what they are abnormalities in the structure of DNA, in the structure of human chromosomes. They're not terrible things like having 4 arms or 2 heads. They're very subtle variations more often. And they're not determined by the environment. So if a population lives in a cold environment, there will not be more mutations making them, giving them more fat or more hair. No, mutations happen randomly, but the environment decides if a mutation is favorable or not. So mutations happen randomly. Okay, in each of our cells, as humans, we have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, and they look like that, the picture on the left. They're DNA. They're DNA molecules twisted and retwisted and retwisted, so they look like that. But if you untwist and untwist and untwist a chromosome, you will have this double helix molecule that you know very well, and this is called DNA. So mutations are abnormalities in the structure of this DNA molecule. DNA molecules are composed of different genes, not all of them coding your phenotype, your body, the physical expression of your DNA. But when some genes are abnormal, well, this would be considered a mutation. What is interesting for us here in anthropology are mutations that happen during meiosis. Meiosis is the process by which we make sexual cells, eggs or sperms. So this process of meiosis leaves a lot of room for error. I will not explain how it works in detail, but there is a mother cell with 46 chromosomes that separates in 2 cells of 23 chromosomes each. An egg if you're female and a sperm if you're male. So during this process, chromosomes join together and they exchange the genetic material, and we call it crossover. And this is during the crossover, during the exchange of genetic material, when we make sexual cells, that errors happen. We have millions of genes, so there is a lot of room for error. And some places in human chromosomes are more susceptible to mutations, to errors. These 4 words you see here on the slide are not important to remember for tests, but just for your information, sometimes during meiosis, a part of a chromosome is duplicated. Sometimes it's lost. Sometimes it's inverted, upside down. Sometimes it's translocated, pasted somewhere, but not on the right chromosome. So a lot of mistakes happen, and these will create mutations. Some of them are not viable. So if this precise egg ends up being fertilized, the embryo will die because the mutation is too big. But some of them are very viable. Some of them are even beneficial. These are some examples of mutations. Mutations can be positive. It means that they help you surviving, being healthy, having healthy offspring. Some are negative. It means they will make you sick, they will kill you, or they will harm your reproductive success. Some are neutral. They will not help you, they will not harm you, they're just there. And they happen randomly, I repeat that. One example of a neutral mutation that does not harm or help your health or your survival is red hair. Red hair is a mutation caused by a duplication on the chromosome. Some beneficial mutations. One of them would be HIV shield. Some people, some humans, are naturally immune to HIV. They cannot develop the disease, and this is a mutation. It's caused by a mutation. Another one will cause very high bone density. So even if you have accidents, you don't break your bones. You're very solid. Other good mutations will increase the capacity of your blood to carry oxygen. Some Olympic athletes have these mutations. I'm thinking about a cross-country skier from Norway has a mutation that makes him super good because he has a lot of oxygen in his blood. So these are examples of positive mutations that help human beings surviving in certain environments. So they go hand in hand with natural selection. It happened in the past. Negative mutations also exist. Most of them today, they're considered as genetic diseases. One that is pretty common in the Quebec province is cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is caused by a negative mutation. It harms your chances of survival, so it's considered negative. It makes you sick. So, as natural selection, mutations are another source of variability in human beings. Natural selection was very active in the past, but does not happen so much today. But mutations still happen in human populations. Okay, the other explanation for human variation from one continent to another or from one population to another would be what we call genetic drift. I will explain briefly what genetic drift is, and then I will give an example of it. Genetic drift is chance factor. It's how a human population can change in its DNA, but not because of natural selection, not because of selection of precise mutations, but because of coincidence. Think of a very, very large population, millions of adults, living in a continent. There is a lot of possibilities of mating, of having children with someone or someone else. There are millions of adults out there. So in such a case, new generations will look a lot like former generations. There will not be genetic change from one generation to another if there's no change in the environment. So generations will just look alike century after century in a very, very large gene pool. In a very small gene pool, think of a few dozens of individuals, a very, very small population. There are very few possibilities of mating. There's not a lot of mates around. So in such a population, some genes will disappear really quick, and some other genes will multiply and explode in occurrence in the population. So every new generation will be quite different from the previous one. An example of random genetic drift that is interesting for us is called the founder effect. The founder effect will happen when some individuals go away separate and go away from the original population, and they stay isolated somewhere else with a smaller gene pool for reproduction. So some genes will disappear and some genes will become more frequent. I will illustrate it in the next slide so you will understand better, and I will give you examples as well. This is an illustration of the founder effect. On the left, you have an original large population, let's say in a continent, where you have an equal occurrence of 3 different genes, blue, red, and white. And there is a small sample of that population that decides, or involuntarily, go for a migration. And in this precise sample is not 100% representative of the original population. There is a higher occurrence here of the red gene and not a lot of people having the white gene. So they move away, they migrate. After a few generations, look at the white gene has disappeared and the red gene is becoming much more frequent. When they settle in their new island or continent or new place, after many generations, again, the red gene is present in all populations, all individuals, and the blue and the white genes have disappeared. So this is the illustration of the founder effect. Some people move away, carrying their genes with them in their blood, in their chromosomes, and the new generations will be different because of the original sample. The founder effect and genetic drift, as illustrated here in the past, played a role in defining how human populations are different from one continent or one place to the other. But it also acted hand in hand with natural selection and the presence of mutation. So all these 3 things worked together. One example I could give you is, oh yes, no, it's more natural selection. Let me find an example. You know, native populations of the Americas, first peoples of the Americas, come from Asia. They crossed the Bering Strait. We don't know exactly when. Maybe 40,000 years ago, maybe 12,000 years ago. There's a lot of theories there. Somewhere between 40,000 years ago and 12,000 years ago. So a small group of Asians crossed the Bering Strait at the end of the Ice Age and settled in the Americas. We know that first peoples of the Americas, almost all of them are from the O blood group. But the original Asian population has diverse blood groups, A, B, AB, and O. So why Native Americans have the O blood groups exclusively? it's probably the founder effect that played a role here. In the original sample, there were more people with the O blood group, and maybe there are some sorts of mutations that happened, I don't know, and maybe their natural selection played a role because the O blood group was favorable in the new environment. But there might be some sort of founder effect that happened there. Another example, in Quebec, I said that we have a high occurrence of cystic fibrosis, but our population here comes from France. But the occurrence of cystic fibrosis is much higher here than in France. So probably in the original population that left France to come here, there were a high occurrence, by coincidence, in the sample of people carrying the gene of cystic fibrosis. So we have seen three major sources of variability between human populations: natural selection, mutations, and genetic drift that work together to make us different from each other. But now let's talk about Homo sapiens. Where do we come from? We come from East Africa. We come from the Rift Valley. And we spread on the planet. We migrated out of Africa, but some other species of Homo were present out of Africa before us, but we exterminated all these previous species of Homo because we're too smart, and our body is super well designed for surviving. We walk on 2 feet, totally upright. We're very efficient for walk. We have free hands because we don't use them for walking. And we have this huge brain, smart brain, with a huge frontal lobe, able of complex judgment. So we totally outsmarted other species of Homo that were present before us, and we took all the place on the planet. So Homo sapiens migrated out of the Rift Valley, out of East Africa, to colonize the whole planet. And because of these migrations in different environments, we developed different phenotypes, different physical traits as a long-term adaptation to different physical environment. This map from National Geographic shows you the major migration routes of Homo sapiens out of East Africa. We migrated everywhere on Earth at different dates. And through these migrations, with the help of natural selection, with the help of selected precise mutations, sometimes with the founder effect, we adapted to all environments. And this shows in our phenotype. The phenotype is the physical expression of the genes. There is short-term adaptation to different environments, and we call that acclimatization. It has an effect only on yourself, on the individual. And this is not what's interesting for us if we talk about evolution. An example of acclimatization is when you travel to a very high altitude. Suddenly, there's not enough oxygen in the air for you to breathe properly, and you get dizzy, tired, with a headache, and after a few days, your blood adjusts by making more hemoglobin, and then you feel okay. So this is short-term acclimatization. A suntan would be another short-term acclimatization to a new sunny environment or summer. What's interesting for us is long-term response to different environmental conditions, and we call that evolution. It affects the whole species, and I will show you 3 examples of that. The first example I give you is how human bodies have evolved at some places on Earth through millennia to adapt to altitude where there is not a lot of oxygen in the air, like in the Andes. As you see in the picture here, these are men from Bolivia. In the Himalaya, these are extreme altitudes. So the human body has adapted to these conditions. People from these altitudes have surprisingly a lower hemoglobin level in their blood, but their blood is more efficient at carrying oxygen in their organs. They have bigger lungs as well. Lungs are very useful for oxygening the body. Some have bigger hearts as well. Pregnant women have bigger placenta for a better exchange of oxygen between the mother and the baby. These are all things that you don't see so much with your eyes, but are inside the body and is how evolution made men able to survive in high altitude. Another example is how human bodies evolved to adapt to heat and cold. In very cold environment and hot environments, the human bodies often look different. Typically, in very cold environments, people will have shorter bodies with shorter limbs. They will be more stocky. They will be more rounder bodies. And this is because when it is very cold, your heart, your body wants to keep the blood around your vital organs. So it's not useful to have very long limbs to carry the blood. So you want a low ratio weight and skin surface. So for the same weight as someone else, you want less surface exposed. So you keep your heat better inside your body. The Inuit population you see as on the right picture is an example of that. They're well adapted to cold because they have shorter bodies and shorter limbs. They have other things that we do not see that makes them better adapted to cold. It's the composition of their blood. It's how their body will not feel the effect of being overweight. They will This is another story. Okay. Adaptation to very hot environment made a lot of populations living in very hot zones with very long bodies, long and thin. You're tall, you have long limbs, and this is very good to have such a body shape in hot environment because you have a higher ratio weight skin surface. For the same weight as someone from another population, you have much more skin exposed. So it's good. Your body will eliminate the heat much better, so you won't have heat strokes. I don't know if you have noticed, but when you watch very important marathons, on the left picture you have a picture of last year's Ottawa Marathon. Those who win marathons, those who do so well, very often they're from Ethiopia, they're from Tanzania, and they're from East Africa. These populations typically are very tall and very thin, not because they're hungry, they eat very well, they're international athletes, but their phenotype is like that. Evolution made them like that, very tall to eliminate the heat. So they're good marathon runners because they can handle a lot of heat. And of course, skin color is a result of an adaptation to different environments. I often hear that dark skin makes you better adapted to heat. It's not the case. Dark skin makes you better adapted to sun radiation. And pale skin makes you better adapted to environment when it is either less sunny or cold enough that you have to put a lot of clothes on year round. So dark skin is very, very good for one thing, and it's one thing that people generally don't know. My students often tell me when I ask, what is dark skin good for? And they say dark skin is good to protect you from sunburns and skin cancer. It's totally true. But it did not play a role that way in evolution. Because if you have sunburns and if you have skin cancer, it does not affect your reproductive success. You will have healthy babies anyways, and you will have time to raise them before you die. And sunburns don't kill you at a young age. They kill you much later in life when you develop skin cancer. So it's not the case. It's not a reason why dark skin is so good. Dark skin is very good at protecting vitamin B, a type of vitamin B we call folic acid in the body. Folic acid is an essential vitamin, and we get it in food, in green leaves and oranges, and I don't know exactly, but it's easy to get your folic acid in your food if you eat well. But the problem is, folic acid is sensitive to sun radiation. It undergoes photosynthesis like plants, and it disappears from your body if with sun radiation. So if you have very dark skin, it protects this folic acid in your body. And folic acid is essential for women to have healthy babies. If you have too much sun radiation that will destroy your folic acid in your body, you have much more chances of having a miscarriage or a baby with pretty important birth defects, um, like spinal cord birth defects and defects from the nervous system. So if you want a baby with a healthy nervous system, healthy babies and no miscarriage, you need that folic acid in your body, and dark skin protects that. In men, it favors a high sperm count because folic acid is good for that. So if you are if your skin is too white and you are under too much sun, well, your sperm count will be lower, which is not good for reproductive success either. So this is why here in northern countries, flour is enriched. You have seen that. Enriched white flour. Well, it's enriched with folic acid. So to protect people from these birth defects and miscarriages and low sperm count. Yeah, light skin is very efficient for something else. It's efficient to produce vitamin D. Vitamin D is very hard to get in your food. We get it with the sun. It comes from sun radiation. And white skin is the best to be able to produce this vitamin D. So if you live in a place where there's no sunlight, or if you have to wear a lot of clothing around year round, you need a skin that is much more efficient at producing that vitamin D. If you have dark skin, you need a lot of sun to be able to produce a sufficient amount of vitamin D to stay healthy. So this is why milk here and dairy products are enriched with vitamin D. It's to protect people from health problems linked with a deficiency in vitamin D. A deficiency in vitamin D will cause rickets in kids and a lot of other bone diseases. For pregnant women, it's essential to have enough vitamin D because if you don't have enough vitamin D when you grow up as a girl, you might suffer from osteomalacia, which affects the shape of your pelvic bones, and it's harder to be pregnant and to give birth. So these two vitamins, folic acid and vitamin D, are essential for reproductive success, were essential in the past for reproductive success in different environments. This is why people from very sunny places develop this dark skin, and people from colder places or less sunny places develop this pale skin. White skin, in fact, is a mutation that was positively selected in the past in northern populations to help them surviving. We'll see that in other PowerPoints.